right, welcome everybody to another Scripture Night. And that's what we're going to call these from now on, Scripture Nights, because I was calling them midweek teachings because I always record these videos during the week. But sometimes I do release them on Sunday, so it was throwing some people off. So I will be calling them Scripture Nights from now on, all right? And today's presentation is called Goats on Fire. And an interesting title. But of course, this is all about Matthew 25 because many people will comment about the eternal fire that's in Matthew 25. But I'm going to make the case, folks, that Jesus spoke much like the prophets in the Old Testament. And they always used the language, apocalyptic language is what we often call it. They used metaphoric language, and fire would be often included to talk about the destruction of a nation. And so when Jesus was talking about the eternal fire in Matthew 25, he was not talking about a realm that's underground where a loving and kind and merciful God torches or tortures people, but rather he was warning them of the up and coming Roman Jewish war where the ancient Israel temple would be completely destroyed in Jerusalem. So we're going to dig into the scriptures and let's see if I can't make this case. All right, so here we are. And I'm showing you Matthew 24 real quick, and I am going to be using the NASB to show you just the quick titles. Now, of course, those things were not in the original text, okay? But it'll help us, I think, this time. So feel free to compare to the Old King James if you have an access to one, okay? But the point is here that this is all talking about Jesus' return, okay? Matthew 24 and 25, because Jesus starts to speak in verse 4. If you have a red letter Bible, right here where it says Jesus answered in 24 verse 4, it's red letters from here on in. He never stops talking. So he's talking the entire time about the same event, which is his return, which we all understand as preterists is when? 70 AD, right? In that 66 to 70 AD time. That's what he was prophesying about. That's what he was talking about. And this is the other thing. A lot of times people forget somehow that one of the titles that Christ had was prophet, and he was prophesying. And in this case, he was prophesying of the Roman Jewish war. And we understand that. So as you're going through this, he talks about the perilous times, right? We know that was going to come upon them. And he starts to speak of his glorious return. And then he talks about a parable of the fig tree. But we understand that this parable is applying to them, right? It was their clue. It was their parable for them in their time. All right, we'll continue. And of course, he's telling them to be what? Ready for his coming, which we know was when? In the first century. And just to remind ourselves that he says this in verse 34. What does he say? Truly I say unto you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. It's the things that he just said and the things that he's continuing to say. So as we roll into Matthew 25, remembering there's no chapters and verses in the original text, we have to understand he's talking about the same event the whole time. All the happenings of the first century. He doesn't all of a sudden break into some, oh, by the way, there's a little hidden realm for bad people. You know, he's not doing that at all. The whole thing is about the Roman Jewish war, all right? So he continues to tell them that what was going to happen to that generation in the first century. And he says, be ready for my coming. He's not talking to us to be ready for his coming, and the preterists understand that. And this includes different versions of partial preterism that you understand that he was talking about in Matthew 24. Therefore, if in Matthew 24 he's talking about the ancient war, if you will, the Roman Jewish war and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, he's talking about that in Matthew 25. Keep it in the context. So he's telling them to be ready for his coming. And then he tells the parable of the 10 virgins. That parable about his coming, how some are going to, go here and some are going to go there. It's the same thing, the 5 that were foolish and the 5 that were wise, right? It's the same thing as you're moving towards the sheep and the goats. Here's the sheep and here's the goats, right? It's the same idea. It's the same pictures. But this parable is for them. It's to prepare them for the return of Christ. Okay, so in fact, this is one of those parables where we can probably glean a little, but not very much from as Christians 2,000 years later, assuming our chronology is accurate. This parable, I don't think we can actually glean very much from it. I could be wrong, but it's primarily for them. That we have to understand, especially as preterists. Parable of the talents. I actually think we can glean a little more from this one, but again, it's primarily for them as part of their hints and their, let's say, I call these prophetic parables. Jesus is prophetically and parabolically painting a picture of his return this entire time. And so as we continue to move forward, what does he go to now? He's talking about the judgment. What judgment is that? Where's that judgment at? The judgment is upon ancient Israel and Jerusalem and the temple. Okay, that's what it's about. So when he gets here, and this is what we're going to mainly talk about today, okay? When he gets here, you have to keep it in the context of the judgment. Okay? That's what you have to keep it in the context of. All right? So before we come back here, let me read a little bit of Genesis, okay, for you. All right? Sorry about that. I scrolled that by accident. Let's read a little bit of Genesis. Why Genesis? Well, the first time that I know of that the Bible talks about fire and brimstone is in Genesis 19, okay? It says, then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire. There it is. Now, where did that raining fire and brimstone come from? From heaven, okay? From heaven. That's where it came from. That's what it says, out of heaven. See, this is fire and brimstone isn't underground. See, it's above the ground and it's above in the heavenly. It's talking about judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sodom and Gomorrah is a land on the earth, you see? And he overthrew those cities. So when you see fire and brimstone, this is how they spoke about the destruction of a city and over a nation. That's how they spoke of it. Fire and brimstone, right? And all the plain, clearly talking about the land, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground, right? Were what? The fire and the brimstone came upon them. So this is picturesque of judgment, right? That's what's picturesque about, all right? But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and he beheld, lo, the smoke. Okay, so when you start to see the smoke, right, of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. There's your analogy. There's all smoke all over the place, like the smoke of a furnace, a fiery furnace with smoke coming out of it. He's looking at the land of Sodom and Gomorrah. This was a judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah for all the ills they were doing. Okay, so it resulted in some kind of catastrophic destruction of the city. That's what's going on here. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain. Okay, so destruction of the cities, fire and brimstone. Okay, so keep that in mind because Jesus is a Jewish Messiah and he's talking to Jewish people in the first century. And we fully understand that the destruction of Israel, Jerusalem, and the temple is about 35 to 40 years away from when he's saying all this. That's what he's prophesying about. Okay, so let's go back here. And I'm going to let you know too, that if you try to use this in some shape, way, or form for eternal judgment, that applies to then soteriology. Well, then you're going to have a big problem if you're a reformer, because there's nothing about belief or faith here. Nothing about believing in God, nothing about believing in Jesus. It's all, did you do the good works? It's all of it. So if you take it out of the context of which he's talking about, following Christ and his teachings at the time, rather than following the Pharisees and the law of Moses and being stuck in the Roman Jewish war when you get attacked in the temple, you're going to make a mess of this, I think. And you're going to actually devour, once again, your own soteriology and your own theology, because your whole theology is you have to believe to be saved. Well, these people, they were doing all kinds of amazing works. The sheep were doing amazing works. So your soteriology is not here. Therefore, it's about the judgment that was up and coming, okay? So let's read some of this. And this is Jesus talking. He's still talking. He doesn't stop talking. He's talking about what's his return in their time frame. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, when was that? First century. And all the angels with him, when was that? And where are they coming from? First century, from the heavenly host position. Then he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations, there it is, the nations will be gathered before him. See, this is not like at the bema seat of Christ or the judgment seat of Christ in the heavenly Jerusalem. He's talking about the nations. And I could argue that the nations that he's talking about is the 12 tribes of Israel. I could argue that, but I don't need to, because my point is that this is a judgment on the ground. That's what this is about. This is all about the Roman Jewish war. Okay? And so these nations that are on the ground, okay, nothing to do with an underground realm. God's not going to lift up the nations, turn them into a ball, and roll them down the alley of hell. That's not what's going on here. Sorry for some of the tongue in cheek, but I'm a little surprised that some folks who I know understand this entire section is about the Roman Jewish war, but they're almost trying to give the fire like a dual purpose. No. That's not proper. As far as I'm concerned, that's not proper. He's using apocalyptic language because Jesus was a prophet as well, and the prophets used apocalyptic language, and that's what he's doing. So we'll continue here. He says, "Will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another, just as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats." This is an analogy, much like the 10 virgin parable, okay? Some went in and some didn't, right? That it's the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of picture. He's picturing out and he's painting the picture of what was going to happen in the first century. And he's using a shepherd. It's not real sheep and not real goats, and right? But he's using the analogy, okay? That some people are going to follow him and escape to Pella. Okay, so read the writings of Josephus and Tacitus, and some people pronounce it Tacitus. It's up to you. The ones who followed Christ escaped from Jerusalem. They got out of Jerusalem, seeing the Roman armies coming. They took off and they went to Pella. Okay? The ones who didn't, okay, that continued to follow the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, right, and decided they didn't want to follow the way of Christ. They chose the law of Moses. They chose the synagogue. They chose the Pharisees. Instead of choosing the way of Christ, they stayed in Jerusalem, and the Jewish zealots took over the temple and started basically killing just about everybody, including their own people. And then the Romans came and clamped down the place in Roman-Jewish war, okay? That's what he's painting out here. And I think we should understand because it's all about the judgment, okay? That's what it's all about. "And he will put the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you that are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared of you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat.'" Where's the belief here? Where's it? See, because you believed. Because you believed. No, he said, "I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. And I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in." See, these are works, and more works. "I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison." And by the way, back then, prison didn't have like showers and gyms, and you could go out in the courtyard to get some fresh air. Okay, if people didn't visit you in prison, you could be beaten all the time, and you could be just sitting there bleeding the whole time. Okay, and they didn't have a nurse or a doctor on site. So visiting people in prison was major. Okay, "And you came to me when I was in prison. Then the righteous will answer him." Oh, the righteous. Oh, I thought it was none are righteous. No, not one. So as you can see, these people are not righteous just because they believed. So if you try to apply this to your current modern day soteriology and your modern day theology, it doesn't work. This is all people working and working a lot and caring about people. This is bear ye one another's burdens. This is the law of Christ, really. And there's nothing here that says, because you believed you're righteous and I'm imputing my righteousness upon you. No, they're righteous because they're feeding the hungry and because they're helping the thirsty people and because they're actually inviting the strangers in to give them a place to stay. And they're helping people that need some clothing and stuff like that. And they're visiting the sick and people in prison. They're doing some really mighty, wonderful works. So your soteriology won't even work here. And that's why I find it very interesting that the people who want to say that, God just imputes his righteousness upon me and then they use this eternal fire for everybody else. And I'm like, well, your soteriology isn't over here. There's nothing here that's saying, because you believed in me. So therefore I imputed my righteousness upon you. Yeah, none of that here. Okay. So see what happens, folks, when people start flipping the pancake and they want to bend everything towards what they already believe. No, the picture here, he's giving the picture that those who followed the way of Christ, this is how they started operating, okay? And they're the ones that listened to Christ and they heeded his prophecies, okay? And that's why they escaped to Pella. It's all in the church history too. So the righteous ones were the ones who followed the way of Christ, and that's why he describes how they operated, okay? So in other words, there was a purpose to the belief, as I've said very, very often, right? They believed in Christ and they did what he said, okay? Therein lies the difference. Okay, just saying you believe, it's just talk. Okay, so we're going to talk more about that, but let's keep this in the context. This has nothing to do with soteriology. And once you realize this is a nation judgment, right? And it's meant for the first century, then you're going to see the apocalyptic language. Okay, you're going to see how the connection is. And it says, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink?" They're acting, well, we didn't even see it. See, this is very parabolic. He's painting a picture. Well, we don't remember even doing that for you. "And when did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did it for me." This is all about the connectivity, about them continuing his preaching and teaching and how he operated and his godliness, right? Therefore, this is not confess that Jesus is your Lord and you will be saved. That's not here at all. It's feed the hungry. Okay, so this is all works. Therefore, what I'm trying to say to you, that you need to see this parabolically, you need to see the pictures, and that he's talking about the ones who followed him and listened to him and believed that he was the Messiah that was to come, and a true prophet indeed as well, the Son of God and a true prophet, and they escaped this judgment and this wrath that was to come in the Roman Jewish war. That's what this is about. And so the next line, and this is what we're going to focus on now, he says, then he will also say to those on his left, depart from me, you accursed people. Okay, so we're going to talk about that because you're going to see this in Isaiah. Into the eternal fire. Okay, there it is, the eternal fire. All right, so let's go to Isaiah. Because I'm making the case that when he says that, he's talking about the fiery brimstone judgment on the Roman Jewish war. And you're going to see he's talking just like Isaiah, for example. All right, and of course he would. He's a Jewish Messiah talking to Jewish people that read the Old Testament all the time, so they would understand this. They wouldn't have thought, oh, he's talking about an underground realm, because they wouldn't have ever thought that, because lake of fire and stuff like that was never thought of as an underground realm. The only place you see it in Revelation, by the way, but we'll continue. Come near, you nations. Do you see that? What do we have here? We have a nation's judgment, right? Nations, right there, okay? Continuing here. He says, let the earth hear. Okay, he's not talking to the dirt, right? But this is how they talk. And all that is therein, the world and all things that come forth of it, for the indignation of the Lord is upon what? All the nations. Same thing here, right? I'm going to gather all the nations. He will gather all the nations before him. He'll gather all the nations before him. Same idea. All right, I'm just trying to show you the correlations here. And his fury is upon all their armies. Where are armies? On the ground. He hath utterly destroyed them. He hath delivered them to the slaughter. What slaughter is he talking about? A war. Their slain also shall be cast out, and their stink shall come up out of their carcasses. Where are carcasses? On the ground when they die. And the mountains shall be melted. Sound like fire to you? Sure it does. With their blood. Does blood burn down mountains? No, it doesn't. Blood does not burn down mountains. This is apocalyptic, exaggerated idiom type of language to paint the picture that there's going to be a lot of bloodshed, okay? And he uses fire and blood. No, blood doesn't melt mountains. Once you start not taking this literal and start taking it as the prophet is trying to give a lot of emoting, right? Exaggerating the language, but really ultimately he's exaggerating the language to give a forewarn of how bad this war, this judgment's going to be. And by the way, this judgment happened on the land of Idumea before Christ even came. So Isaiah is telling the Idumeans, this is going to happen to you guys, okay? He's prophesying, and Jesus is borrowing the same type of language. That's why Isaiah continues and says, all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fall down as the leaf falleth off from the vine, and as a falling fig from the fig tree. Now look at all that and go back here what Jesus was saying. For example, here when he says in Matthew 24, right? He talks about the, sorry, I went a little too far, the parable of the fig tree. So you're seeing some fig tree talk, right? Just like you did in Isaiah. And then you're also going to see what? The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light and the stars are going to fall from the sky and the powers of heavens will be shaken, right? It's the same type of wording. Why? Well, because that's how they spoke. That's how they did apocalyptic language. And Jesus is borrowing the same type of language because he's prophesying to the Jews in the first century. And he's letting them know that they're going to have a bunch of heavens being rolled up together as a scroll. It's the same type of conversation, okay? It's not an underground realm. Isaiah's not talking about an underground realm. You're going to see that. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come down upon Idumea. He even tells you where, right? It's not the entire world everywhere. It's specifically the Idumeans. That's where this is going. And this already happened. And most preterists know this. And upon the people of my curse to judgment. What are you seeing here? The same thing. You're seeing the judgment, right? That's why I use this, by the way. You're seeing the judgment. And what does he say over here? He says, come here, you cursed, into the eternal fire. It's the same kind of thing that's going on here. It's not a literal fire that's going to burn for infinity and beyond any more than blood can melt mountains, okay? It's apocalyptic language. And so you're seeing judgment and curse, and you're seeing where this this judgment is going to come upon the Idumeans, and you're seeing the melting and the fig tree stuff and the heavens rolling up and stuff falling from the sky. It's not literally the sky's going to crack. Okay. So we're going to have to start catching on to that. And he continues and says, the sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness and with the blood of lambs and goats, right? Now, he's using it differently, but notice how they use animals. I'm going to separate the sheep from the goats. Do you see that? Oh, there's going to be the blood of the lambs and the blood of the goats. Same type of language. That's what I'm trying to paint here. You can see he's borrowing this type of language. With the fat of the kidneys of rams, for the Lord hath a sacrifice in Bozrah and a great slaughter. Where? Where? Underground? No, in the land of Idumea. He's telling you where it is too. And Jesus is saying to them, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, it's coming to you. And he's using the same type of language. And the unicorns shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. Do you see the kind of language they use? For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance. If you go to Luke 21, he says that for these are the days of vengeance, right? Same type of talk. Why? Because here it was going to come upon the Idumeans. When Jesus is talking, this judgment is coming upon ancient Israel, Jerusalem and the temple, and the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion. So there was, I make a long story short, there was some kind of controversy between the Zion, if you will, that's the wording that's being used here, and the Idumeans, and there needs to be a recompense, just like ancient Israel was recompensed for all the righteous blood from Abel all the way to Zechariah, whom they slew between the altar and the temple, including all the saints and the people they were persecuting as well, that were following Christ. Okay? Same idea. And the streams thereof shall be turned into pitch, and the dust thereof into what? Sulfur, brimstone, sulfur. That's what that is, right? What? Fire and brimstone raining from heaven. Where's this brimstone coming on? Idumea. It's a land, see? And the land thereof shall become burning pitch. So there's your fire and there's your brimstone. And it's the land that's going to be in fire. Why do you think Jesus is saying that the goats, right, in the judgment, in the war, are going to go into that brimstone and fire? Because that fiery war, right, the wrath of God is the Roman Jewish war. It's the recompense in the war. That's what this is all about. Same idea. Okay? And I'm going to say it again. I think most preterists know this. Okay? But for some reason, they try to always give, it's the same thing with the lake of fire, same idea. They're trying to give it a dual purpose for some reason. A little peculiar from where I'm sitting. It shall not be quenched day or night. So do you guys want to go to Idumea right now, ancient Idumea, and see if the fire is still on? I'm sorry for being tongue-in-cheek here, but can I assure you that if it was on, there'd be a bunch of Christian apologists over there filming it for, I'm pretty sure for 50, 60, 70 years, they'd be filming it for you if it was still on. Do you see how it's exaggerated? It's never going to be quenched, night or day. This is a type of language that's also in Revelation. It's very apocalyptic. The smoke thereof shall go up forever and ever. Yes. See, shade, it's going to go forever. Yeah. Okay. So you want to go there? See if there's still smoke on there over there? There's no smoke still going on there. This is the type of apocalyptic, extremely high kind of, high pressure language they would use. Okay. So are you seeing forever here? Are you? I think you are. It's never going to be quenched day and night. That's right. Oh boy. Is that true though? No. Anyone knows that historically Idumean, what happened in Idumea it's over. Okay. And I'm going to prove it actually in the scripture anyways. So that's what's going on here. It's an exaggerated, it's going to be fire, forever. And the smoke's going to go up forever and ever. And it'll never be quenched, right? He's using the same type of language. Okay. It's not because the sun's actually going to fall from the sky. And it's not actually that the smoke is going to go on forever. And just so you guys understand too, this is just my thought on this. When a fire goes out, the smoke continues, right? So when the destruction of a city, and you go to Genesis, Abraham said the same thing. You could see the smoke continuing, right? It's like you remember, right? Or wherever there was a fire, there's still the smoke. So you remember what happened. And we're still remembering what happened in the Roman Jewish war, even today. Okay, and that destruction and that the prophecies of Jesus came true. So the smoke to me is like an idiom of that we can remember the memory of what happened. Okay, and the ruins and what happened in that time that Jesus warned them about. Okay, so, but either way, folks, if you want to go to Idumea and see if the smoke is still going, that's up to you. But I'm going to just suggest to you that it's not. And anybody who knows that this already happened, they know that it's not still smoke going on over there. And they know that clearly this was exaggerated apocalyptic language, really no different than if I said, man, that person, what he just said just blew my mind. You didn't really blow my mind. Okay, my mind is still here. Okay, but we talk like that. We emote like that, and so did these prophets. So the mistake there is over-literalizing the apocalyptic language. From generation to generation it shall lie waste, none shall pass through it forever and ever. But the cormorant and the bittern shall possess it. Now watch this. The owl also and the raven shall dwell in it. Oh boy, wait a minute here. What, the owl can dwell where there's fire there all the time and the smoke is going and there's fire all the time? How can the owl live there? What has he got, like some kind of fireproof suit on? And he's going, whoo, 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 it's hot over here. Like, no, come on, folks. Sorry for the tongue in cheek, but no, sorry. So what is he saying? He's saying there's a war, there's going to be destruction, and the owls and the ravens, no, the ravens won't have like some kind of, fireproof suit on or anything like that, or a fire hose. No. The raven and the owl are there, right? So it's proof that it's not a fire that's continuously going. Here's the picture. Basically, there's a huge destruction and the animals can go there and be safe because just about everybody's going to be gone and dead, right? It's a gruesome war. Everybody's pretty much done and finished. It's a destruction of the city, and the owls and the ravens get to park up in the trees and go, I can't believe these people like to kill each other. Okay? And that's what's, essentially the picture that I'm seeing here. But it's very, very clear that an owl and a raven can't be where there's constantly fire and smoke, because it's going to burn the trees down and everything as well. It's apocalyptic language, and he's painting a picture that, you know what? The owl and the raven's going to be able to come here, but you guys are going to get destroyed. That's essentially the picture of what's going on here, okay? A line of confusion, right? It's like, well, confusion after the whole thing is obliterated. It's not being obliterated. It's a destruction of a nation. That's what the fiery language is about, okay? So, folks, I'm trying to show you as best as I can that in this eternal fire, okay, it's his way of talking about it's apocalyptic language, just like in Isaiah. And I think I've made my case here that the eternal fire, folks, is not an underground realm. And I know people want us to be prepared for the devil and his angels. That's those who are opposed to Christ, and they went into that war, okay, and they got destroyed and or went into slavery. That's what that is. You can't all of a sudden out of nowhere make this soteriology. And I'm going to remind everybody something too, by the way, okay? Because what I'm seeing here from 34, right? I was hungry and you fed me, and I was thirsty and you gave me drink, and I was naked and you gave me clothes. You know what that is, folks? That's this. That's, therefore, all things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do you even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. People are forgetting this. This is the law and the prophets. Not some of it. This is the law and the prophets. That's Christ's teachings there. That's what's going on there. Let's go to Luke 10:27-28. And he answering, this is a Pharisee actually, or a scribe that's answering Jesus. And he says, yeah, we're supposed to love the Lord our God with all our heart and soul and strength and mind. And we should love our neighbor as self. And he puts it all together like that. And Jesus says, thou hast answered right. This do, and thou shalt live. He's telling him, you do this and you will live. How come nobody wants to talk about this? If you do that, that's how you live. Where does he say he's got to do a creedal confession and believe a Trinity and get dunked in a tank? None of that. He says, no, you do that and you will live. Why? Because this is the law and the prophets. Okay? Jesus said, you do that and you will live. Okay? That's what he says there. So, taking it to this, all right? If you do this, you're blessed of my Father, and you will inherit the kingdom. If you don't, you're going straight into that Roman Jewish war. That's the deal. All right. And that's what this eternal fire is. Okay. And I'm going to remind you one more time. That's what the fire and brimstone is in Genesis. It's judgment from the heavenly host position. And I'm going to suggest to you that if Matthew 24 is all about the Roman Jewish war and the destruction of Israel, Jerusalem, and the temple, and we as preterists or partial preterists fully understand that, then that's the continuing conversation here in the judgment. And therefore, this fiery language, and all these heavenly hosts that are falling from the sky above earlier here, okay? Just above here, sorry guys, I'm just kind of trying to remind everybody where that was. Yes, it was here. Sun be darkened and the moon will not give its light, all that, along with this eternal fire talk. It's the same type of talk that Isaiah was giving to the Idumeans. It's the same type of talk where it's about the judgment. And that judgment, we know, came upon that generation in 70 AD. And that's what that eternal fire talk is all about. There it is, guys. I'm making my case because some people kind of bring this scripture in and they take Matthew 25, which is clearly the continuance of Matthew 24 and clearly the continuance of the conversation that Jesus is describing, that Roman Jewish war and all the judgments that are going to come upon that generation. And so all that talk is about that timeline. So we're going to have to see the apocalyptic language and recognize that Jesus indeed, Son of God and a prophet as well. And he was prophesying the way the prophets would prophesy. He imitated that type of language, speaking to a Jewish audience 2,000 years ago, assuming our chronology is accurate. And he spoke much like Isaiah did because they would have understood that language. And they knew when he spoke like this, that there was a coming judgment. That's what he was pronouncing. And when he talks with the fire and the sun and the sky, the fallen and all that kind of stuff, it's all apocalyptic language to paint the picture of what was coming. And that's how the prophets spoke. So I hope this helps you kind of further understand, kind of understanding how the prophets used to talk, and now how Jesus was speaking, and he was mimicking and he was imitating those prophets. And the more we use those types of ways, like taking the Old Testament, how did they mean it here, and then looking at the language Jesus is using and applying it to the destruction of Israel, Jerusalem, and the temple, I think we're going to make a lot more sense of what we're reading here. And rather than creating an underground realm where somehow goats are on fire. And I'm really, trying to move people to start to open up their minds to the apocalyptic language and starting to recognize that Jesus was using it too. All right. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, guys, do all things with grace and peace.